Well, hey everybody, it's Pastor Mitchell here, and I want to say thanks so much for joining us from wherever you're watching from and with whomever you might be watching with today. Now, we know this format is certainly not the same as being together in the room. We certainly miss seeing your faces. We miss those conversations at the door. We miss a lot of what it means to be together as a church family during these times. And yet, we want to continue to make the most of what we have before us in the best ways that we can, which is why we continue every Sunday to have church online available, which the large majority of our congregation is participating by, which is why we continue to drop devotionals through the middle of the week and encouragement that way. That's why we've encouraged you to get together in your group to tend to pray for one another and encourage one another through these times. And so on that note, I just want to remind you that if you have or know of a specific need yourself or within the community that we can meet or something that we can be praying for, certainly want to encourage you to reach out with those things that we can do our best to meet those needs and that we can be praying for one another as well. Pastor Mark is doing some great things with our students online that you can check out. If you are kind of in the junior, senior high range, know that there are some Zoom meetings happening, some fun things are happening over there, some other kind of hangout options. And so check those things out as well for Voyagers. That's our primary to grade 5. We have virtual Voyagers where there's videos about crafts and songs you can be singing and a message from Mark that you and your family are able to do together. And so if you have questions about access for any of those things, again, please reach out to Pastor Mark or check out our Facebook page to find out more information. Now, I want to let you know about one thing that is brand new starting this week that we're dropping that I'm really excited about. It is a study through the book of 2 Timothy that we're calling The Good Fight. And so each week we're going to be dropping a video that kind of takes us through a particular part of 2 Timothy. There's going to be an opportunity for questions that you can personally reflect on. You can talk over with your spouse. If you are in a small group, that you can kind of share in that discussion in together for our mutual edification and for the building up and inspiring of our faith as well. And so to give you a little bit more information about that and how to access it and everything you need to know, check out this helpful video. I started grade 6 in a brand new school. And it was during September of that year where I found myself outside at lunchtime playing basketball with some of my friends when a fight broke out between two brothers. Now, the older brother had somehow managed to jump onto the back of his younger brother, and he, with one arm, had him in a chokehold, and with the other, he would just pounding on him. And as I watched all of this unfold, I thought to myself, this isn't good. Somebody's going to get really hurt here, and I need to do something about it. And so I ran over and tried to push the older brother off of the younger brother, and somewhere in the process, I ended up getting sucker punched in the stomach, and it hurt a lot. Now, after all the dust had settled and we'd been hauled into the principal's office along with some of the other people who had witnessed the events, the principal began to ask questions that pulled back the layers about what really happened. And as he did, he began to tell people that they could leave until there were just the 3 of us left. And I realized that in that moment, there's a good chance I'm going to be in really big trouble. And so as I sat in that chair awaiting my fate, I began to wonder, was my involvement in this fight really worth it? You know, you and I fight for and about all kinds of things. It could be who gets the last dessert after supper. It could be who's going to have control of the television remote. It could be deeper and more significant issues like social justice or politics or religious views. But I think there comes a point in all of our lives where we've experienced enough that we begin to look back and we realize that some of the fights that we were involved in, they just weren't worth the cost in the end. In fact, some of the fights that we were a part of might even be the source of our biggest regrets. But I want to remind us that there is one fight that is always worth getting into the ring for. The Apostle Paul wrote a letter to his young protege, Timothy, at one point toward the end of his life where he's under house arrest in Rome awaiting trial before Caesar. And as Paul's writing this letter to Timothy, he realizes that his time on earth is probably coming to a close, that his death is probably going to be soon. And so in this moment of personal reflection, he writes these words to Timothy. He says, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith." And I wonder, what would it take for you and for me to be able to say the same thing at the end of our lives? And so I want to invite you to join us on a journey through the New Testament letter we call 2 Timothy. And starting this week on Wednesday, we're going to drop a video, and each week we're going to drop a new video that unpacks a part of this letter. And at the end of the video, we're going to give an opportunity for you to reflect on a couple questions. And these two questions you can use for personal reflection, or you can discuss them with your spouse or a friend or a small group that you are a part of. But I want to encourage you to join us on this journey through 2 Timothy. And my hope is that it encourages all of us to be part of the good fight.
When the howling storms of doubt and fear assail, by the living word of God I shall prevail, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of Christ my Lord, bound to Him eternally by love's strong cord, overcoming daily with the Spirit's sword, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot fall, listening every moment to the Spirit's call, resting in my Savior as my all in all, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God. uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable, you place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable, you see the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God. Redeemer, you have set this captive free. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen.
There are about 3 times a year, every 4 months or so, where I set aside some time just to sit down alone and take stock of things. And I draft up out of that process something I call a personal and professional development plan. And so that involves a few different things that you don't need to get into all the details of, but one of them is just some reflection over some particular categories that are major parts of my life, and some of the goals or dreams or desires that I might have in relation to them. And so, for example, I might sit down and look at kind of physical health, and what are some of the things that moving forward I need to pay attention to. And so one of the things even most recently is I need to drink more water during the day. I want to make sure I get enough sleep. That's one of the things. There's also kind of spiritual goals. Am I on track with just kind of being in the Word? How is my prayer life? Are there other kind of rhythms or disciplines that perhaps I need to incorporate into my daily or weekly or some kind of routine that I might have? There's other places too, things like relational. How am I doing in my relationship with my wife, with my kids, with friends, with maybe a mentor? Are there other particular areas in terms of relationships that I need to work within? And so I take some time to reflect on all that, and there's a bunch of other things too. But one of the things that I do is kind of identify some of the reading that I want to do over a 4-month period. And so again, most recently, I looked through my library and I identified about 9 books that were on my shelf that I haven't read that are really interesting to me. And I've kind of prioritized 4 of those that I want to read over the next 4 months. And so at least those 4, if not the rest of them as well. Now, in the process of that, it got me kind of looking at my library. And just as kind of a quick scan, I decided to kind of count up how many books I had. And I think there's somewhere around 420 books in my personal library. Now, for some of you watching today, you might think, man, that is a ton of books. Where do you ever read all those? I would never read that many books. For others of you, it might be like 420, that's it? That's all? Man, I read that many last week. And so, but that's not the point. I guess in just kind of looking at it, that's about how many books I have. Now, about 25 of those books are commentaries and reference books, mostly oriented toward theology and, kind of biblical studies. And so there's some of those books. I have about 15 other books that are compilation books. And so, for example, for English Lit, I've got a book about this thick that has a bunch of English literature in it, whether it's poetry, prose, Gulliver's Travels is part of it. There's all those things. I have the complete works of Stephen Leacock, who is commonly referred to as the greatest Canadian humorist. Maybe I need to pick that book up and get some humor back in again too. I don't know. So there's about 15 of those kind of books, but then there's just a whole bunch of other books. And I think I've read about 75% of my entire library, just to kind of give you an idea of that. But on my library shelves are all kinds of different types of books. So again, there's English literature. There's my personal favorite, I think, of all of them, the complete works, a 3-volume set of every Calvin and Hobbes cartoon that Bill Watterson ever drew up and wrote. I've read through 2 of those volumes. I got the 3rd one left, so maybe I'll pick that up sometime on vacation this year. I don't know. But there's other kinds of things I have too. There's history, there's fiction, there's theology, there's leadership books, there's all of the rest that comes with that. And that kind of reading pattern has been a part of my life for quite some time now. In fact, it's kind of bled into our home as well. Emma is now at a point where she's into chapter books and she loves reading. In fact, before bed at night, she'll often sit down and read 4 or 5 or 6 chapters of a novel that she's interested in. If you were a fly on the wall at our house, or any on vacation in particular as well, you would often see Carolyn curled up somewhere with her Kobo reading a book as well. And the thing is about reading is that we all read for lots of reasons. Some of us read a lot more than others. Some of us try to avoid reading as much as possible. But when we read for lots of reasons. But the thing about reading is that I think a large part of our reading comes in an effort to gain understanding of something. Whether that is instructions about how to do something, whether it's a particular insight into a particular area of research, whether it is to try to understand a perspective that somebody has on something. A lot of our reading has to do with the accumulation of knowledge and of understanding in our lives. And when we read, we experience all kinds of emotions. Sometimes we laugh at things we read. Sometimes we have aha moments where we say, wow, that is so interesting. That's kind of piqued my curiosity, or that's changed my perspective. But with reading and understanding can also come headaches and heartbreak as well. Now, when I was a student in university at Atlantic Baptist University, one of the things during my undergrad there is, that's the time of your life as a student where you're kind of devoted to learning and understanding in higher education. That's kind of the whole point of going to university. And so during that time, particularly toward the end of the semester, after you've done the course readings you were supposed to do, and now you kind of get into the season of researching and writing papers if you're doing an arts degree, all of those deadlines seem to fall around the same time. And so some people plan out well when they're going to write their papers. I was not that kind of person in university. I left things to the last minute. I would go to the library. I would do all my research at once. I'd read papers. I'd pull all-nighters. Not the best advice for those of you who are in school, but that was kind of how I did things. But the stress that accumulated at the end of the semester after these months of learning and classwork and exams that were coming and papers being written, all the accumulation of that stress just created a lot of tension and headaches in people as they tried to remember everything that they've been learned in order to produce the kind of things that they needed to produce in order to pass the course. And so through all of that, usually sometime during paper or exam season, someone would inevitably post this verse out of Ecclesiastes 12, verse 12, that says, "Of books there are no end, and much study wearies the body," which is absolutely true, because mental fatigue is a real thing. Now, speaking of Ecclesiastes, we started our journey through this book a couple weeks ago, and we began with just kind of an introduction to the book. And then last week, we highlighted kind of the first part of the author or the teacher's search or quest for meaning, purpose, and significance in his life. And that's essentially what the book of Ecclesiastes is. It's this record or journal of this search for meaning and purpose of life under the sun that's been collected by a narrator or by kind of a commentator later on. And so through the search, what we've discovered is that the conclusion of the matter for the teacher who outlines his experience in this search, he basically starts saying everything is vanity. Everything is like mist, vapor, fog, cotton ball clouds. You reach out to grab it and just realize it slips through your fingers. And the whole process of his big experiment, what he records for us in the book of Ecclesiastes as a result, is his record of deconstructing every possible means of fulfillment that could be offered in life under the sun or apart from God. And so last week we talked about his desire for remembrance or permanence. But in doing so, and looking at the natural world, what he discovered is that we are eventually erased by the earth. And when our lives cease to be, that the world keeps turning. And so not finding any fulfillment, purpose, meaning, significance, and looking to the natural world, now the teacher turns his attention to another place. And in chapter 1, verse 12, we read, "I, the preacher, had been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven." Now, one of the things we might not pick up on right away is a nuance in his statement about seeking and searching. And there's a difference between seeking and searching out in the way that it's used and applied here. What he says is that I sought to seek, to do a deep dive into something, to seek out the depths of a thing and of one particular thing, but not only that, but to search out in terms of the width of something in order to do a comprehensive survey of every option and opportunity that's available. And so not only does he take one thing in particular and do a deep dive into it in terms of his pursuit, but it's also a wider survey that's in view, that there are many things that he will do a deep dive into. And so he throws himself completely into seeking and searching out through all of the feelings and thoughts that are attached to it and experiences, everything or all that is done under heaven. And so he intends now to look at every aspect of life according to human behavior and every activity under the sun, and to try to wisely somehow examine how people function. And so he turns his attention away now from the natural world toward the humanities, to things like literature and art and music and politics and industry and social lives and private lives and social systems and all of the rest. And it's interesting because isn't that kind of the goal of the university even now? It's to kind of, all higher education is kind of built on this pursuit, whether it's a deep dive into one subject because now you've got your undergrad degree and now you've done a graduate degree in it, and now you've done your doctoral work and you've got a dissertation or a thesis and you've defended that, and so now there's like, you go from kind of the bigger picture and you do a deep dive into one particular subject to come out the other end as in some ways an expert on that subject. But then there's kind of the wider view of interdisciplinary studies and of just a general degree of sorts of kind of sampling of everything. And so the pursuit of higher education is very much this pursuit of Solomon, or the teacher himself, in trying to find meaning, purpose, and understanding through an accumulation of knowledge of the humanities. And as a king in his day, he had opportunities and he had things and means at his disposal that many other people did not. And after seeking and searching, here's what Solomon, or the teacher, concludes. He says, "It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with." It's an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. In other words, to Solomon, in his perspective, all of our pursuits cost effort and cause trouble. He says it's wearisome. It is tiresome. It is frustrating at times. Why? Because there are problems we encounter along the way in our pursuit. There are issues that come up. There are hindrances to us being able to try to accomplish what we want to accomplish. There is even sometimes opposition to things we're learning or hearing or understanding to be true or not true, or that we're trying to weigh out. And so all along the way, it's this struggle and this toil and this wearisome path toward gaining knowledge. And not only that does that create an unhappy business, but Solomon, or the teacher here, gives a throw-out reference to God. This is the first time that we see this happening in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, the term that's used here for God, because in Hebrew there are a variety of terms that are used to identify God, Jehovah, Yahweh. Here, the term that's used for God is Elohim. And it's more of a generic term for God that kind of has with it this sense of the supreme being. It's kind of, a general term used for God. In fact, even in the Bible, it's used to refer to, in some cases, other so-called gods. And so Solomon's use of the word Elohim, which is consistent through Ecclesiastes, his use of the word Elohim is kind of a toss-out reference. It's a referential point of a generic term kind of in passing, but he doesn't attach to his reference to God any sense of divine purpose. There's no kind of divine intervention. And the reason is because for the teacher, the pursuit of meaning, purpose, significance is limited to life under the sun. And while he may reference God as being above the sun, the reality is that his search is somehow, as best as it can be, disconnected from any of that pursuit or reality. And so it's a passing reference. It's kind of like he looks to the wider sphere of life of all of humanity, not just God's covenant people, not attached to any sense of divine revelation, just simply life under the sun. And while he acknowledges that God exists and that God is above the sun, his pursuit is disconnected from that reality. And so in verse 14, he says, I have seen everything that's done under the sun. I've done the survey. I've looked around. I've had opportunity to, with my eyes, see, and with so many other opportunities to participate even in a lot of those things. He says, I've seen everything that's done under the sun. And behold, he says, here's my conclusion. Again, all is vanity, a striving after the wind. It's a mist, a vapor, a fog. It's cotton ball clouds. It's here and then it's gone. It's transient. It's temporary. It lacks substance to it. It's like a striving after the winds, he says, which literally translated is it's feeding on the wind. It's like trying to eat the wind. And what happens when we do that is that pursuit just simply breaks the human spirit. Like we are constantly chasing, but never catching, never satisfied in the same way that the rivers flow to the sea, but the sea is never full. And then he throws out this interesting proverb or statement. He says, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And what he means by this is that look, what's crooked can't be made straight. Is his point in terms of the discussion here is that knowledge simply reveals our misery, but it cannot remove it. In other words, simply knowing something doesn't actually change the thing. It just gives us understanding of it. And so what's crooked can't be made straight. Knowledge reveals our misery, but it can't do anything to fix it. And not only that, he says what is lacking can't be counted. In other words, there is an accumulation of knowledge that we can never reach the cap on. Our understanding of things will always be incomplete. That's kind of where we get the old adage, the more you learn, the less you know. And so it's interesting to me because as you think about kind of Solomon's perspective from 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, we live in an age that's in some ways very different from that. In fact, our age right now is called the information age, and there's a reason for that. We have so much accumulation of information at this point in history. In fact, some would say that the accumulation of knowledge and understanding in our world today is growing exponentially at a profound rate. And part of that is due to the fact that we have technology, we have access to information. I mean, there's a reason why Google isn't just simply the name of a search engine. We use it as a verb. So if we don't know something, what do? Well, we Google it. In fact, just last night I was playing Nintendo with my kids, and we were playing this part of the game where you had to find 3 big coins in a certain level. And as we were doing that, we ran through the whole level and we didn't find one of them. And we got to the end and the kids said, look it up. See if you can Google it to find out where the coins are. And so we sat down and I pulled out my phone and I typed in, Super Mario, how do you find, the coins in this world? And we watched the video about it, and then we went back to the game and we played the game and got all the coins. Like we didn't know something, but there's so much access to information right at our fingertips. Now someone will make the argument that, look, it's caused us to not ever wonder about things anymore, to not really be curious enough about things anymore, which in very much part might be true, but the reality is that we live in a time and space in history where there is such an accumulation of knowledge. It's the information age. But what happens with all of that information, and there are some who have raised concerns about this, is that what can happen with all of that information is that we end up with information paralysis. That there's so much information about opinions and perspectives and facts and one-liners and this research study or this quote over here and look at this thing over here or read these books, that there's so much information about a thing that we can easily get overwhelmed by it because we can't literally process all of the information. So we end up with information paralysis or information overwhelm. And what that can produce in us as human beings is high levels of stress, high levels of anxiety, there's mistrust, there's uncertainty because of all the different interpretations of the information. And so with great information also comes a great burden that's placed on people. And while we have lots of access to knowledge, again, some are wanting to make it clear that what we see developing as a result is that we lack the capacity to discern properly through that knowledge. We lack the capacity to know what to do with that knowledge, whether it be moralizing it, whether it be trying to put it all together and pull out the pieces that don't belong. We lack the capacity of what to do with all the information that we have been given. And part of the fallout of that is a loss of the ability to have public discourse or level conversations about pick anything. Because the minute one person says one thing, somebody gets set off. The minute somebody introduces a new idea, how could you ever say that? And so we've just lost this ability with all the information we have, in some ways, to have public discourse and to be able to discern properly through all of the information, which in many ways is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Because wisdom is actually having the knowledge, but knowing what to do with it. Now in verse 16, the teacher says, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who are over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Now, the teacher here is not being boastful. He's simply adding legitimacy to what he is concluding. He's saying, look, this isn't just kind of a shout out. This isn't kind of an emotion talking. This isn't a feeling that I had in the middle of the night that I've drawn a conclusion on. No. I have the resume for it. I have surpassed so many in my accumulation of wisdom, and I have applied my heart wholeheartedly to gaining knowledge. And then he says, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceived that this also is but a striving after the wind. I've looked at both sides. I've weighed virtue and vice. I've weighed wisdom and folly. I've looked at truth and error in order to at least have a rounded view so I don't find myself in an echo chamber of when I hear one thing and I already agree with it and I say that's good, but when I hear another thing I don't agree with, I just immediately tag it as bad. No, I've looked and sought to understand all of the perspectives, he says, and I've sought to be discerning in the process in terms of my pursuit of wisdom, which is a good thing and an important thing for all of us to do. But here's what he concludes in verse 18, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. In other words, the wisdom that we gain, actually attached with it is grief, worry, trouble, and affliction. And he who increases knowledge, he says, increases sorrow. Because the greater our understanding of a thing or of humanity, the greater the sorrow we experience. Why? Because knowledge, in the end, doesn't actually change anything. At least not in and of itself. And so, as a kid, if you're anything like me, there were times where you wish that you had a superpower. Maybe your superpower could be to fly. Maybe for you, it was to shoot lasers out of your eyeballs. I don't know what you thought your superpower might be cool to have, but I knew some kids who thought it'd be really cool to be able to read people's minds. That would be awesome, just to be able to walk around and know what they're thinking and what they're thinking but not saying, to be able to read people's minds and have access to that information that nobody else does except the person thinking it. But then you grew up and you got Facebook and you got Twitter and you realize I don't want to know what everybody thinks. You realize that was actually maybe a bad idea. Maybe that wasn't really a superpower after all, because here's Solomon's point. When we desire to know more and we work hard to accumulate that knowledge and understanding, part of the process of that along the way is that for most of us, we realize at some point that our opinion is not unbiased, that we bring our own biases to a particular discussion or view of things. And in the process of that, we also become aware of our own ignorance, of the things that we don't know, of the things that we might not ever be able to figure out or to learn or to understand. And then at some points too, we also realize that we begin to see things that maybe perhaps other people can't see for one reason or another. And what ends up happening in the end is that the result can be envy and opposition. And we recognize and realize that knowledge, again, does not ultimately change us. And so what we expected to be honor, and what we expected to be delight, and what we expected to be an advantage for us, eventually is met, in some cases, with envy and contempt and opposition. And so Solomon's conclusion, the teacher's conclusion, is that wisdom is full of headaches and heartbreak. So what do we do? What do we do with that? What do we do with that conclusion? To gain knowledge and the pursuit of all, isn't that important? Well, yeah, but if it only ends in misery and headache and heartbreak, what do we do? Should we just burn all the libraries in the world? Should we shut down schools and not tell people not to get educated? Should we stop producing books and writing instructions? Should we do any of those things? No, hear me out. Please don't do that. That's not what I'm advocating for. I'm just saying, is that the response that we should have to the conclusion of the teacher about wisdom and knowledge and its accumulation? There is another side to wisdom and knowledge that actually comes from the same teacher. And I want you to hear the other side of it. And it's not a contradiction, because it is true that an increase in knowledge and understanding can increase headaches and heartache. But in Proverbs chapter 2, the same teacher says this: "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to my wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight, if you raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and you search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." In other words, if you will just lean in, if you will pursue wisdom, knowledge, understanding, if you look for it like you would look for any kind of silver or gold or precious jewels, he says, what you will discover is the fear of the Lord and the knowledge of God. And he says in verse 6, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path." He says, "For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul, and discretion will watch over you, and understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech who forsake the paths of righteousness, to walk in ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil, and delight in the perversiveness of evil, and whose paths are crooked, and who are devious in their ways." In other words, if we seek out wisdom and knowledge, it has the potential to keep us on a right path and a good path as we fear the Lord, as we honor him. And it keeps us from the missteps of evil and deception and crookedness. And so wisdom and insight, while they can be full of headaches and heartbreak, also has the potential to set us on a right path. Now, I love how this begins to play out in the life of Jesus. Early on in his life, we don't know much about the young life of Jesus, but there's a few glimpses we get into that. And in Luke chapter 2, after Jesus is born in Bethlehem, his family eventually relocates back to Nazareth. And when he grows up in Nazareth, Luke tells us this about Jesus as a young boy. In verse 39, when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, that's Mary and Joseph, his parents, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom. And the favor of God was upon him. Now, in the very next instance, we read about this time where at 12 years old now, Jesus heads to Jerusalem with his family for the Passover celebration. And while he's there, they spend some time in the city and eventually start to make their way back home. But then at some point along the trip, his parents realize he's gone missing. And they're in this frantic search to find him. And it takes them all the way back to Jerusalem, where they discover he's in the temple, sitting with the teachers of Jewish law, asking them questions and having conversations with them. And Luke tells us that every one of those teachers of the law were amazed at the wisdom of this child. They were amazed at his insight. They were astonished by how this 12-year-old could know and understand so much and ask the right questions. And then Luke tells us, as he continued to grow from that point in verse 52, as Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So Jesus himself, even as he grows in wisdom and understanding and in the favor of God, until we come to this point in Mark chapter 6, where this is where the headache and heartache comes in, because in Mark chapter 6, we get this intriguing account where in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, in his hometown, he's preaching at the synagogue. And Mark tells us in chapter 6, he went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They were, again, amazed. They marveled at what it was. Like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Like this is incredible. Like that he is teaching in this way in the synagogue. And so the conversation, kind of after church, becomes this. And they say, well, where did this man get these things? Like, where did he go to school? Who taught him? Who was his rabbi? Right? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us also? And so what starts with kind of amazement and astonishment at Jesus' capacity and insight and ability in the synagogue quickly turns to, hey, but we know his family. Like, have you seen his brother? Have you ever heard his sister? Man, like, this is a shady group. Like, we know all the rumors about how he was born and what that's been like. And like, this is a shady crowd. And so then Mark tells us that when they discover all these things, when they realize who Jesus is, it says, and they took offense at him. And Jesus said, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. And he could do no mighty work there except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. In other words, the people took offense at Jesus because of his hometown, where he was from, because of his career. Because isn't he the son of the carpenter? Isn't he himself a carpenter? Does he even have an education or a degree? Where did he go to school, by the way? And not only that, but it's family too. And the wisdom Jesus has causes headache and heartbreak. But in Jesus, we see the wisdom of God at work. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, the Apostle Paul reminds the church in Corinth of these things. He says in verse 18, "For the word of the cross is foolishness or folly to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe." In other words, people don't come to know God because of their great learning and wisdom and understanding, but through the message of the gospel, which is the story of the reality of Jesus walking this earth and all that he accomplished among us. It's through an actual event. He says, "For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness or folly for Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." And what's Paul's point? He's saying, look, Jewish people always demanded signs. They looked for miracles. They looked for evidence, any kind of shred of divine intervention that would bring authority and legitimacy to a message or to a teaching. And for Greeks, it was all about wisdom, about the new ideas, about philosophy and even sophistry in many ways. And the Greeks even had Athena, the goddess of wisdom. But Paul says, but we preach Christ crucified. The simple message of the good news of God in Jesus. And the wisdom of God in it is this, that God turns defeat into victory. That God turns what was meant for evil to accomplish something incredibly good. That out of death comes resurrection. And that is the wisdom of God. And for those of us who have put our faith in Jesus, we know that the truth of the matter is it is not your wisdom. It's not your knowledge. It's not your status. It's not how much you've given in an offering. It's not what your gifting is and how impressed people are or how big of a following you have. None of that accomplishes what only God could accomplish in Jesus. Salvation from sin and death and hell, to be rescued out of that space and to be brought into relationship with God where we experience forgiveness for our own foolishness, for our own folly, for our lack of wisdom that led us into all kinds of trouble. And what God has done in Jesus, again, not because of anything we've done, but because of what Jesus has done through his death on the cross, his burial, his resurrection from the grave, that because of that we can be restored to God. And so what would I leave us with today? Oh man, pursue wisdom. Seek knowledge. Try to understand, but know this, that knowledge itself will never be enough to satisfy our soul's longing for purpose and meaning and significance. Because only Jesus can do that. Only Jesus can rescue us from the trouble we're in, to bring us into a relationship with God where we can be forgiven, redeemed, and restored. And if you haven't taken that first step today, I encourage you to do so. I plead with you. Say yes to Jesus. Recognize the space that you're in, and every single pursuit that you have will not satisfy. Only Jesus can do that. Let me pray for you. God, I thank you today for the opportunity we have in this way to open up this word, to be understanding of it, to discern our way through it. And God, I thank you that we have this search before us that keeps us from so many of the troubles that we might experience in our lives simply through our knowledge and understanding of what's happened. But God, we know that at the end of the day that our knowledge will never fully satisfy our longings. Our knowledge will never be enough. And it's only through what Jesus has done that we find our soul's satisfaction. It's only through the comfort of knowing him and being brought back into right relationship with you, Heavenly Father, through Jesus' death and resurrection, that we can find salvation, that we can find our life's purpose, that we might live to your glory. And so God, wherever this lands for us today, if someone needs to take a first step of faith to say, yes, Jesus, I trust you, I believe you are the Son of God who died for my sins, was buried, who rose again, that today that would be their prayer and they would take that first step of many along a path of trusting and following Jesus. And God, for those of us who feel overwhelmed and anxious and stressed about all the knowledge and opinions and all the pieces of what's happening in our lives, no matter what it relates to, God, I pray that we would have the discernment and the clarity in the midst of it to know the fear of the Lord and to do what is right in honoring him. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a fantastic week, everybody.